closing the door on Jewish immigration into Palestine. Justice, really, and revolt, 1945-1946. So, with the end of the war in Europe, May 8, 1945, Jews all over the world hoped and expected that the doors of Palestine would be opened for the survivors of the Holocaust. May 22, 1945, 2 weeks after the German surrender, Dr. Weizmann wrote to Churchill to ask that Jewish immigration be resumed. But in his reply on June 8, Churchill informed Weizmann that there could be no possibility of the question being effectively considered until a proposed peace conference. Weizmann was appalled by this decision to delay what was, for the survivors of the Holocaust, a matter of urgency, life and death. On June 13th, he replied to Churchill that the contents of Churchill's letter had come as a great shock to him. President Truman's wish that the survivors of the concentration camps should be allowed into Palestine had already led to protests not only from the Arab states, what else is new, they were with the Allies, but also from the Congress in India. Palestine was so effectively barred to Jewish refugees that the American quota system was still rigidly enforced. The exodus of Polish Jews did not end at Berlin. All over Europe, Zionist emissaries were organizing escape routes to Palestine. A struggle now began in Palestine and in Europe between the British government and the Jews, a struggle marked by increasing bitterness and extremism on both sides. The British determined to halt the now swelling tide of illegal immigration from liberated Europe to mandatory Palestine. So they got to die in Europe instead of being freed in Palestine. What went so far as to return captured immigrants from the waters of the eastern Mediterranean to which they had sailed to the displaced camps in Germany from which they had fled. Wow. In Europe itself, at the frontier crossings between Austria and Italy, British troops halted concentration camp survivors who were on their way to the Adriatic and to Palestine and held them in former prisoner of war camps. Welcome back home. Inside Palestine, the Irgun, Jewish terrorist organizations headed by Menachem Begin, reacted by attacking British military installations, and his death sentences and reprisals increased the tension. Acts of increasing desperation marked their efforts. Force alone, the Irgun believed, could bring an end to the white paper, open Palestine to an unimpeded Jewish immigration, and make possible a Jewish majority and Jewish statehood. Since the beginning of 1945, the newspaper Manchester Guardian reported some 353 Jews had been murdered by Polish thugs. Unfortunately, it added, anti-Semitism is still prevalent. Well, even though the war is over, large numbers of Polish Jews are in fact succeeding in leaving Poland, their objective being the British and American zones in Germany and Austria, en route for Italy, and thence by illegal means to Palestine. The great majority of the Jews wanted to leave Poland. They looked upon Palestine as their traditional home, the cradle of their race and the center of their faith. Despite British efforts to prevent the Polish Jews from setting out on the hazardous road to Palestine, the situation inside Poland itself made flight inevitable. 9 months had passed since VE Day, and the Jews, British, and American liberators had made no move to accept them in their own countries. They had gathered them into centers in Germany, fed them and clothed them, and then apparently believed that their Christian duty had been accomplished. They, the Jews, knew that far away in Palestine there was a national home willing and eager to receive them and to give them a chance of rebuilding their lives, not as aliens in a foreign state, but as Hebrews in their own country. The hunger strike by Jews on 2 ships was, in fact, successful, and on May 8th, the Dov Hos and the Elihu Golom sailed for Palestine, their 1,014 passengers having been granted immigration certificates from the month's quota. The Anglo-American Committee Report. The Anglo-American Committee republished its report May 1, 1946. Among its recommendations were the end to the land purchase restrictions of the 1939 White Paper and the immediate grant of 100,000 immigration certificates to the Jewish survivors. The Jews of Palestine were bitterly disappointed that their hope of statehood was not endorsed by the committee, which recommended a continuation of the mandate. Frustration now overcame and indeed almost overwhelmed the Jews of Palestine. On June 16th, the military arm of the Jewish agency Haganah blew up 9 bridges and damaged the Haifa railway and workshops. On June 29th, the British retaliated, sealing buildings, arresting 3,000 Jews, including most of the senior members of the Zionist executive. Meanwhile, the pogroms in Poland continued. In Poland, 42 Jews were killed. Within 24 hours of the Kielce pogrom, more than 500 Jews fled from all over Poland. They were harassed wherever they went. These new refugees also turned towards Palestine. In Palestine itself, the arrest of the Zion leaders had created a ferment of discontent. Within 3 weeks, that despair reached a climax with, on July 22nd, the blowing up of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem by members of Irgun. 91 people were killed, British administrators working in the hotel, Arabs and Jews. Winston Churchill reverses his support for the Jewish settlements in Palestine en masse. So Britain, said Churchill, should not be in too great a hurry to give up the idea that European Jews may live in the countries where they belong, and he continued, I must say that I had no idea when the war came to an end of the horrible massacres which had occurred. The millions and millions that have been slaughtered, that dawned on us gradually after the struggle was over. But if all these immense millions have been killed and slaughtered, there must be a certain amount of living room for the survivors, while empathetic, and there must be inheritance in properties to which they can claim. And are we not to hope that some tolerance will be established in racial matters in Europe, and that there will be some law reigning by which, at any rate, a portion of the property of these great numbers will not be taken away from them? It is quite clear, however, that this crude idea of letting all the Jews of Europe go into Palestine has no relation either to the problem of Europe or to the problem which arises in Palestine. Churchill then referred to the King David explosion. It is perfectly clear, he told the Commons, that Jewish warfare directed against the British in Palestine will, if protracted, automatically release us from all obligations to persevere, as well as destroy the inclination to make further efforts in British hearts. Oh, careful you don't back up so fast you'll run over yourself. And yet, Churchill added, we must not be in a hurry to turn aside from large causes which we have carried far. Really. For many Jews, Churchill's speech, and in particular his remark about the absurdity of allowing the Holocaust survivors to go to Palestine, was a bitter disappointment. The history of British hesitations with regard to the war crimes trials reveals the extent to which the Jews, despite the enormity of their sufferings, were not considered either a nation or a people who, having suffered as such, deserved the support of the existing Allied states. October 1946, 11 new Jewish settlements were established in the Negev in a single night, aimed at ensuring that the Negev would be included within the boundaries of the state. 2 weeks earlier, on October 1st, Weizmann had gone to see Bevin at the Foreign Office to ask Bevin to agree to some form of partition as first put forward 10 years earlier by the Peel commissioners. But Bevin replied, the Arabs would not accept partition. What have they got to do with it? Was he to force it on them with British bayonets? Bevin also spoke of the growing anti-Semitic under the skin as there exists now. So, the 22nd Zionist Congress moves toward justifying armed resistance in Palestine. The 22nd Armed Zionist Congress opened in Basel on 9 December 1946. The new Negev settlements, Weizmann told the delegates, have in my deepest conviction a far greater weight than 100 speeches in resistance, especially when the speeches are made in New York, while the proposed resistance is to be made at Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Weizmann did not minimize the cause of Jewish bitterness. Indeed, his speech contained a powerful reproach of Britain's white paper policy, for, as he told the delegates in bitter tones, whenever a new country was about to come under Gestapo rule, we asked that the gates of the national home be opened for saving as many as possible of our people from the gas chambers. Our entreaties fell on deaf ears. It seemed that the white paper was more sacred for some people than in life itself. Sometimes we were told that our exclusion from Palestine was necessary in order to do justice to a nation endowed with 7 independent territories, covering 1 million square miles. At other times we were informed that the admission of our refugees might endanger military security during the war. It was easier to doom the Jews of Europe to a certain death than to evolve a technique for overcoming such difficulties. When human need, the instinctive self-preservation, collided with the white paper, the result was that the Stroma, the Patria, and Mauritius, which were tragedies for the Jews, were not allowed to emigrate. These were the stern words describing a situation which many of the delegates regarded as the justification for armed resistance. So there's an epilogue in this story, 1978, 47 to 48. Now we've had, since then, nearly 200 years. And have things changed? No. For 6 years, from 39 to 45, the Jews had been caught between the evil designs of those who sought to destroy them and the indifference of those who had no special desire to help them. 6 million had been murdered. Not only Jewish lives, but Jewish life had been blotted out. Traditions, possessions, culture, the natural evolution of future generations of many more millions, all had been destroyed, more than one-third of the whole of world Jewry. No longer could the Jews entrust their fate to others. The Holocaust was a bitter final culmination of 2,000 years of persecution. By the winter of 1946, the arguments in favor of Jewish statehood were, for the Jews, of overwhelming clarity. In Palestine itself, the British remained vigilant in their search for hidden Jewish arms. Worrying about Jewish arms and that the Arabs can keep shooting. Jews caught in possession of arms were arrested, imprisoned, and even flogged. Following one such flogging on 29 December 46, the Irgun seized a British major and 3 sergeants and flogged them in retaliation. With the opening weeks of 1947, the violence increased. On January 1st, an Irgun group, in attacking a British police post, killed a policeman. The British press began to urge partition and a British withdrawal. The British government was coming close to the end of both its patience and its self-confidence. January 1st, 47, at a meeting at the Cabinet's Defense Committee, it was agreed that to continue this policy in Palestine in the present circumstances placed the armed forces in an impossible position. 3 days later, the Secretary General of the Arab League and General Azam Pasha announced that the Arabs would vote against any partition scheme they might put forward, and they would continue to oppose any further Jewish immigration. Such Arab hostility was well known, but on the morning of January 7th, a new factor was introduced into the Middle East discussion, which made Arab goodwill even more essential. For on that day, a top-secret memorandum was circulated. The Middle East, it stressed, was likely to provide a greater proportion of the total world increase of population than any other oil-bearing region. It went on to warn of the grave risks involved in offending the Arabs by appearing to encourage Jewish settlement and to endorse the Jewish aspiration for a separate state. The certainty of Arab hostility to partition is so clear. So, now we get the United Nations involved. Britain turns the problem of Palestine over to UNSCOP, UNSCOP. The Cabinet now came to a decision which marked a turning point in the history of British mandate. Failing an agreed settlement between Jews and Arabs, the Cabinet minute recorded, any solution to this problem would have to come before the United Nations, passing the buck. On February 14th, Bevan announced that Britain would hand the whole problem over to the United Nations. On May 15th, the United Nations set up a special committee on Palestine, known popularly by its initials as UNSCOP. 4 of the 11 UNSCOP committee members went to Haifa to see for themselves what was happening. There, Eban wrote in his autobiography, "The Jewish refugees coming from Germany aboard the ship Exodus, which were transformed to the ship Empire Rival to be returned, had decided not to accept banishment back to Europe to face continued and deadly persecution with hostility. If anyone had wanted to know what Churchill meant by a squalid war, he would have found out by watching British soldiers using rifle butts, hose pipes, and tear gas against the survivors of the death camps. Wow. Men, women, and children were forcibly taken off the prison ships, locked in cages below decks, and sent out of Palestine waters. When the 4 members of UNSCOP came back to Jerusalem, Eban recalled they were pale with shock, and he added, I could see that they were preoccupied with one point alone. If this was the only way that the British mandate could continue, it would be better not to continue it at all. The Empire Rival was sent to Europe with its refugees. Forced by British troops to disembark on the hated German soil from which they had already fled, these illegals were sent to a displaced persons camp at Poppendorf, one prison camp to the next. On July 4th, David Ben-Gurion appeared before UNSCOP. An unbroken tie between our people and our land has persisted through all these centuries in full force. The homelessness and minority problem position made the Jews always dependent upon the mercy of others. They are never masters of their own destiny. They are entirely defenseless when the majority of people turn against them. What happened to our people in this war is merely a climax of the uninterrupted persecution to which we have been subjected for centuries by almost all the Christian and Muslim peoples in the world.